Welcome to the Growth Fire Podcast, where we engage with top business leaders who share their experiences and provide real insights that help them attract customers, retain staff, and grow their bottom line. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hi there, I'm Kevin Horrigan, host of the show, where I featured inspiring business leaders from various backgrounds and industries who are willing to share their stories and insights. Today's podcast is brought to you by SpindyTech. Hey, Rick, here at SpindyTech, we help middle market and larger companies get more leads. Who doesn't want more leads? At SpindyTech, we use an end-to-end digital approach, starting with your website and making sure it has the right aesthetic look and feel, convincing content to help convert your visitors into action. And then we help you with all the aspects of your digital marketing, from organic search, paid search, social media, paid social, email marketing, marketing automation, and more. With the right website and the right optimized digital marketing campaigns in place, we assist our clients in getting more qualified leads, gather new clients, and help them grow their business as well. SpindyTech, thank you for your sponsorship. If you want to learn more about SpindyTech, you can find them online at www.spin.tech.com. Well, our guest today is Rick Torrison. Rick is a coach, consultant, transformational growth analyst with over 25 years of experience helping individuals, teams, and organizations overcome obstacles. Rick has a core belief that everyone was created for more, not just more stuff, but for more influence, more impact. And he's developed a proven and tested coaching process that has helped not only individuals, but organizations clarify their vision, tap into their motivation, remove obstacles, and develop a roadmap to their greatest success, both personally and professionally. Rick, welcome to the Growth Fire Podcast.
I'm excited to be here, Kevin. I've been looking forward to this.
Yeah, well, I want to give a shout out. You know, we've got an opportunity to get to work together over the last month or two from Matthew Connor from Cyberlink. So Matt, a big shout out to you. You're a great guy, great podcast. Been a guest on the Growth Fire podcast before. Just want to give you a shout out and thanks for making the introduction.
Yeah, man, he was awesome. I got to do his podcast. I think it's dropping this next week or so with him with the Cyber Business podcast. So that was a lot of fun, and I was thankful for the connection. Man, I'm excited to be here today.
Yeah, and I can't wait to compare stats with this podcast and his later. No,
come on, I like a little competition. I'm all about that.
That's going to pay. I'm going to pay for that later. So, Rick, I'm sure our audience want to know a little bit about yourself. Can you tell us maybe where you grew up, maybe what you wanted to be when little Rick wanted to be when he grew up, maybe went to school? Just share a little bit about your upbringing with us.
Okay. Yeah, I still don't know what I want to do when I grow up. So I'm working on that. I'm a work in progress, but I love what I'm doing now. Hey, if it's okay, before we get into me, your people may already know this, but I've got a question that will help me in what I do that I like to ask my hosts if it's okay with you. Can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
Man, awesome. So I wrote a book. It's called Born Limitless. I do a lot of coaching around this idea of limitless mindset, limitless beliefs, and the limiting beliefs that kind of keep us from our greatest success and significance. So here's my question. I was looking at your background. I was doing my homework, man, entrepreneur stuff. I mean, the business you built, the journey you've been on. I mean, I love what you're doing. You are in the right industry for the right hour. I mean, everything is going digital and online and tech. And so, man, I love everything you're doing. But here's what I know is in our journey to get to where we are, we've probably had to overcome some limiting beliefs.
Sure.
Right. And so I do a lot of work around that. I'm curious if you had a thought, like what was your greatest kind of challenge or limiting belief that you had to kind of hit and overcome and flip to get to where you are today? Or maybe it's something you're still working on. Right. But I'm curious, is there a limiting belief that you had to work through in your journey to get to where you are today?
I mean, where do I start? Rick, I went to school to be a dentist and then ended up becoming a digital advertising agency. So, start there. I didn't go to school for a marketing or technology background, but I'm lucky enough to be the co-founder of an amazing MarTech company today. And so, there's a lot of limitless, there's a lot of challenges in that. I think that probably, confidence is probably the area in which, as limited and still today, it's a matter of how aggressive you are to dream and then how far you're willing to connect that dream, the dots of making that dream a reality. And my gosh, I don't sleep well. But when I do have an opportunity to think big, the limit, the challenge is do you believe in yourself to be able to connect those dots, or is that just a fantasy that's never going to become a reality? And so I think through my entire career and where I sit today, I continue to aspire to find a newer North Star that's bigger and brighter, but farther away. But I have, challenges in understanding if I can actually find, a roadmap to get there. So I don't know if that's an answer. That's a comment.
Yeah, no. And thank you for sharing that. And I appreciate the vulnerability with that, because I think it's something that we all wrestle with, right? That we all have to face, but sometimes we don't realize or know where they are, where those limiting beliefs are. And I loved what you said about, the confidence in believing in self. Someone would look at you and say, man, Kevin's got it, right? He's got all the confidence. Look at what he's done. Look at where he's at. He has to have confidence to have gotten there. And that's true, but it doesn't mean that confidence didn't come through a price and a cost and a process, right?
Sure.
Of our own self-doubt, our own limiting beliefs. And so I appreciate you sharing that with me, just because, one, I think it's real, that it helps people kind of go, okay, I'm not alone in this process of really struggling with, am I good enough? Can I do this? And I loved what you said about aspiring, to continue to grow, right? I think when we do that, it's awesome, but the risk is we run into some roadblocks. Like when we want to grow and we press, a lot of times we'll run into some stuff and go, oh, where did that come from? Like, I didn't know that was in me, or that thought. And so, man, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting question. I think, just onto that too, people joke, Kevin's a man of a million, I call them famous phrases, but phrases and quotes. But, one of them is, I always say, be careful what you ask for, because when you get there, you'll often change your mind. And I think with the limit of belief, you couldn't believe you could ever get to that point. Well, after you got there, you start to reinvent, like, where could I go now? Because I thought that was a crazy fantasy that I could never get to be there. And that's where it starts to be able to give you some of the building blocks and foundation to be able to start, attacking these limitless beliefs and things of that nature. And
yeah, it's so true, man. That's so good. I often say, and this is not from me, obviously, people say this, that, and in my desire, in my career and what I do, and I'll kind of take that little journey here in a second, but I really believe that leadership is all about my ceiling being someone else's floor.
Yeah.
Right. And I want to serve and invest and grow people into that place. And sometimes in our own lives, we break through our own ceiling, but then that ceiling that was a ceiling is now our floor. And now we look up and we go, okay, what's that next ceiling that I need to break through? And typically to break through, it comes at the cost of a belief that we've got to work through and wrestle through to shift, to get to that next level in our lives, personally or professionally. So, man, that was good. That was all. That's worth the price of admission. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. We'll catch up next time.
No, but I resonate with everything you said. I think you shared it that my ceiling, I want to be I want my ceiling to be your new floor, and I think it's very parallel to be careful what you ask for. When you get there, you'll change your mind. And so you asked here, that was your ceiling. You got there. Now that's your new floor, and now you're trying to create your next ceiling. And so very parallel.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Well, I guess if I was going to answer your first question, just real briefly, my journey, I'll do the cliff notes, right? So, my story, the book that I wrote, I think we'll talk about that a little bit. I wrote a book called Born Limitless. It's my first book. It's very humbling, very transparent, like vulnerable. Like, this book made me very vulnerable and exposed some more beliefs I had in myself that were limiting in the process. But I started as a child in the Midwest. I'm in Houston, Texas, but actually was born in California to a single mom, and was raised by my mother and my grandmother, and hippie uncle, right? And so he was a good man, but I was born in the mid 60s. And so, he was, you think about a hippie, that was my uncle, but he was a good man. And I was so glad he was in my life. He was one of the only male influences I had growing up. But in that journey of growing up, there was a lot of challenges, a lot of hard places. And what I discovered in that's pertinent to where I am today and what I do is those experiences that I had, and I share about them in my book a little bit, created how I interpreted some of those experiences, some good ones and some not so good ones. I had an issue with a babysitter at 6 years old that took advantage of me, And so that happened. And I had, this situation without a dad in a time period when everybody had dads, right? You'd go over to their house and there's mom, dad, and the kids sitting at the table, and no one came to our house because it was just mom and grandma. And sometimes we didn't have dinner because they were out working, right? And so there were all these things that were happening that I didn't have any control over, that I had to interpret. And this is important when when we unpack some of the story. I had to, in my own mind, interpret these experiences. I had to define them for myself. What do they mean? What does it say about me? What does it say about family? What does it say about people? All of those things. And those interpretations, how I defined those experiences, began to shape my beliefs, how I viewed life, the world, relationship, family, all women, right? This situation, that babysitter, I didn't have any context for it, and I didn't have anyone to explain it, and I didn't talk about it. I knew it wasn't okay, but I wasn't in a position to go, hey, stop that. This is wrong.
Right.
So I had to experience it. And for me to experience it, I had to define it, interpret it. Why is this happening? And so all of those things ended up becoming beliefs that I held that I didn't even know I intentionally created through my thought process, that began to shape my actions for the rest of my life, or until actually I met my current wife. And those beliefs that were leaving a wake of relationships, broken relationships behind me, a lot of damage along the way. Well, when it got to my wife, I was like, man, I really love this person. I want to spend the rest of my life with her. But why am I self-sabotaging this? Why am I doing all these things that if I don't change, this thing isn't going to make it? And I didn't have a clue why and what or anything. I just knew the old way of living, my behavior something had to give, right? And so I share all that because my story in the book and my coaching. So I do personal development coaching, leadership training for teams, individuals, organizations, that kind of stuff. And I help people get from where they are to where they want to be. So typically, to bridge that gap, you've got some beliefs that you've got to deal with to take you across that gap. And so that's where the coaching comes in. And so I grew up in the Midwest, a lot of limiting beliefs, kind of created this imposter syndrome, put out this outward thing that said, man, I'm a leader, I'm in charge, I'm in control. And inside, I was always terrified and afraid. And it wasn't until I met my wife, my future wife, that I said, I have to do something about this. And somebody asked me, and then I'll stop and let you ask a question. I don't want to dominate all the conversation here. So somebody asked me a question, how is that belief serving you? And I didn't even understand the question. I was like, what do you mean, that belief? Well, you have certain beliefs because your beliefs are driving your actions, and all the things you're doing are coming from something you believe. So what is it that you actually believe? And he took me on this journey. It wasn't psychoanalysis. I wasn't on a couch. It wasn't this deep, but he was just asking questions. I thought, well, man, what is it I believe? Why do I act this way? And I went back to, man, this is what I think about women, and this is why. And I thought, wow. That's how and this is how I think about myself. I must deserve it. I must have done something. I'm not good. I'm not whatever it was in that moment became my beliefs, became my behaviors, got my outcomes. So he said, well, what if you went back, and what if those beliefs that you formed at that moment, how you interpret that experience, what if those beliefs that you took on, how you interpret, is a lie? What if they're lies? And what if the normal that you're calling normal for the last 25 years of your life, this normal life, he said, what if that normal life isn't normal? And I was like, well, time out. What do you mean? And so we dug in, right? And I was like, okay, well, if it's not normal, what would be normal? What would be the belief then? If I go back and say, I'm going to interpret that abuse, because that was real. The pain, the brokenness, all of that was real. But how I defined it was a lie. And so I couldn't change what happened, and I acknowledged that, but I said, you know what? It doesn't mean that I'm a bad kid, that I did something wrong. So I started reframing my interpretation of that experience, which then led to new beliefs, which allowed me to have new behaviors, which really saved my marriage and my relationship with my wife, who we've now been married 33 years.
Congratulations.
But so that's where all that kind of happened. So I was always leading, always in the front, always driving, building businesses. I was a coach, high school coach, played basketball, high school, college, the whole thing. I was out there. But inside, I was always just a breath away from running away from it all collapsing because of the belief system that I had built my life on. So anyways, that's a little bit about that journey and how I got to where I am. And I finally said, once I realized this and started living this out about 30 years ago, I said, man, this has been revolutionary, transformational for me.
Yes.
And I'm wondering how many people actually live in the same place and same space I do.
Yeah.
And we don't have to. What if other people's normal isn't normal?
Yeah.
And I could help them break through that professionally or personally. So anyways, that's kind of the backdrop of what brought me to, what I'm doing today.
Well, and I appreciate you sharing that. I appreciate the vulnerability on that side too. And part of my next question you have a passion for this. How did you get, what inspires you to get to use this as a business? I think you shared, you had this upbringing. I've always said, who we are today is a byproduct of our upbringing. And then what consciously we've done as adults to transition that upbringing to something different than how it was going to organically continue to mature. And you had an upbringing, you had an opportunity to realize that upbringing was going to condition you to continue to have the behavioral patterns that you did, unless you intentionally wanted to shift some of those.
Yeah,
and you may intentionally chose to revisit what you had experienced, which you thought was the only truth, to have a different perspective on it, re-rationalize it, and process who Rick was going to be going forward, not the foundation of the broken Rick that had been created in the process. And so it sounds as if that journey for you, unfortunate in some of that, is not only helped you become more of who you wanted to become, and not so much a breath away from having wanting to run away, as you said,
right.
But now wanting to have a passion for this to be able to help others.
Yeah. I say, Kevin, in this process of part of my learning, right, is that our past, you said we're a byproduct of our past, and I believe that, but our future is yet to be written. Sure. And our past was never meant to define our future. Sure. It was meant to inform it and refine it, but not define it. And oftentimes we wear our past, and if people are watching this, they'll see like my past back here, and I'm moving my hands in front of my eyes, right? We wear our past as lenses by which we view our future. Yeah. And if our past is marked and, there's stuff in it, then the way we view our future is limited because it's viewed through lenses that are scratched or marred. Yeah. And we don't even realize it. We live in that space for so long. This is kind of what I was saying. We call it normal. Right. And that's what that guy said. You've been living here so long, you think this is normal life, but what if it's not? Right. And if I can get people to challenge the normal, then the sky's the limit, because then they can start thinking, okay, if this isn't normal, what am I missing? Because that normal that we're settling for often becomes a ceiling over our lives, and we settle for something less than we were called and created for. Well, right. And so we've got to understand the past is a part of how we got here, but it doesn't define where we're going. And we don't even realize we do that.
No, it's not the conscious. It's not the conscious.
Yeah. Until someone brings it into an awareness, right? Till we have that conversation, it's like, that was the revelation. I was like, wow, okay, wait a minute. You mean I can flip this script? I said, absolutely, you can flip the script. Not necessarily easy, but this is the first part. The first process is to acknowledge that maybe what I'm thinking and believing is not based in a truth.
Correct. And I'll transition that to maybe a business example. I'll plug a former coworker of mine, Mike Sapp, who was my CFO for probably 7 years. He used to say in business, how much money corporate America loses on an annual basis from team members and organizations saying, well, that's the way we've always done it. It's the way they always want to continue to do it that way. And that may have been an effective approach at some period of time, but it doesn't mean it's the only approach going forward. But too often in companies, we take a position, we've always done it that way, and no one's willing to revisit a new way of doing it that may have a better outcome because they've been conditioned on that was the right way from some foundation.
So good.
And often it's, unless someone asks the question why you do it that way, it'll continue to be done that way, no different than in your journey and who you serve. It's giving them an opportunity to visit, like, just because that was your foundation, it doesn't mean that's the foundation you have to build off of from the future going forward.
That's so true. And I do a lot of work personally and professionally with companies in the Houston area, Ship Channel, big businesses. I work with their executives and teams. And the same principle that I'm talking about in this personal journey is true professionally. Yeah. Businesses and growth and things we're doing. There's a framework I introduce in the book, and it's a simple framework that I didn't create. It's just I put this reality into a process. And it's real quickly, if I can, it's all the outcomes that we get in our lives, the results, good or bad. This is neutral. All the results that we get in our life, all of them, are a result of a behavior or action, something we do.
Yep.
Right? Okay. So everything we do, and this is where it gets a little more like people like, wait a minute, everything we do, all of our behaviors and actions are a result of something we believe, even if it's unconscious. Every behavior that we engage in because we have a certain truth or belief that we have about it.
Right.
So, and every belief that we have, it goes back to what I was saying earlier, comes from an interpretation of an experience.
Sure.
How we defined it. Well, and the feelings and emotions associated with it. This could be good or bad. It's not, this is a neutral process.
Right.
But when we understand that this is how we get to where we are, we can then be able to look at our outcomes. And if we don't like our outcomes, and let me ask you this. So typically, and you know this working with companies, and you're in a cutting edge industry that's always evolving, right? But at some point it had to evolve. It had to move from the old ways to the new ways, right? Sure. And so when we don't like the outcomes we're getting, typically our first response is to do what? We in business or personally, when we're not getting the outcomes we want, what's the first thing, Kevin, that we typically do from your perspective?
I mean, typically we start to ask questions. Why aren't we meeting the KPIs? You know, what we start to investigate.
And so then what do we do? What's the action? So we typically try to change behaviors, get new systems, new processes, new resources.
Yep.
Thinking that if we do all that, we'll get better outcomes. And the truth is we can get better out. Absolutely, you're going to have to change behaviors.
Yes.
But I don't know if you've been like me. I've ended up working with businesses and even my own life. I'll do all the changing. I've got a strong will. I will change my actions to get to my results, but I find myself back in the same results because I never dealt with the belief that drove the behavior.
Sure.
And until I deal with that belief, I'm going to cycle these behaviors and outcomes, and I'll get better because I'll have new behaviors, but sustaining and transformation doesn't truly happen until we deal with the belief that drives it.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're making change, but you're towing around an anchor that's dragging behind you, and it's not releasing you from the opportunity to take advantage of the adjustments you are making by letting that black cloud trail you on the journey. So while you're making the commitments, you're making the adjustments, you're changing behaviors, all that type of stuff. If you can't get rid of that in the belief system, you've only partially moved forward.
Yeah. And you said something, if you don't mind. So we have a staffing company as well. And my father-in-law started it 58 years ago. So when he was doing business, this goes back to the business side. He was doing business. He's like, hey, if it's not working and we're not getting candidates placed or we're not getting clients in, you show up earlier, you get on the calls more, and you stay later till it's done.
Yep.
And he believed, I mean, that was how you fix this. You grind it, you work harder. That's a belief that drove the actions and behaviors to try to change the outcomes. You know, 50 years later, my wife's running the company and we've got all these offices all over it. And that mindset, you guys, everyone listening, y'all know someone that comes in with that mindset, get here earlier, make more phone calls and stay until it's done. Tell me how that's going to go.
Not Yeah.
But it wasn't that he was mean or ugly or a tyrant. He had a belief system that said, this is how you execute to get the results.
Right.
And if we're not willing to change the belief, which he did, and he's matured, but if he wasn't, I don't know if the company would exist because you wouldn't have any people working for you.
Yeah.
So anyways, you can see how that works in that business place. And we don't even realize we're doing it sometimes.
I'll share a follow-up story to that. A few years ago, my older son was working in commercial banking, and he would call me sometimes. It'd be 10 minutes to 9 and like, hey, you know, how's the office going this morning? He's like, oh, I'm driving in. I'm driving in. It's 10 to 9. What are you talking about? It's like, Dad, it's banking. You know, we don't start till 9 o'clock. I'm like, did you ever think about going in at 8 o'clock and impressing your boss? He's like, no, because he's not going to be there. I'm like, all right. And so I would joke, you know, like sometimes it's 10 to 5 and he'd call me and I'm like, hey, you know, how's work going? He's like, oh, Dad, I'm heading home. And I'm like, heading home. It's 10 to 5. He's like, oh, yeah, 3:30. And I said, did you ever think about, you know, like doing this a little bit differently? And I'll never forget this, Rick. He said this, hey, Dad, I know that's how you did it, but I'm going to accomplish the same things you did with a different path. And I so respected that approach. And I believed it to be true. And the belief system I had, which was work harder, grind it out, was the way I was instructed, and it had some success to it. But he was educated on a different belief system.
Yes.
And he was confident he'd have the same outcome without having to do the same amount of using a different approach, different activities.
Yeah,
And it
so
didn't have
true.
to involve the same amount of hours as well.
So good. I work a lot with companies in this area because you're dealing with generational processes, right? And so we do a lot of generational training because you have these beliefs at each generation of how life should be, how work is. And when COVID hit, we lost a lot of people in the upper management and leadership. They just said they were done.
Yeah.
And they retired earlier. They were gone. But what companies discovered is that they had not done a good job building a pipeline of leaders. And so they had these generational gaps that were coming, and they were just throwing people in there because of position or title or what they'd done. And they were starting to struggle with leadership and culture because they never really understood that relational dynamic of the generations and the differences, right, of how they operate and work. And it's not less than or worse than, it's just different.
Just different. Yep.
And so anyways, it's interesting times.
It is. So Rick, let's talk a little bit. So you had the inspiration to write this book. So just tell us a little bit about, what does the book contain? And then follow-up question would be is how you go into market to get awareness for your book to be out there?
Man, great question. So the book really is a part of my coaching framework. It purely deals with what we've been talking about. How do you identify the limiting beliefs, crush them, replace them, and then build new behaviors to your greatest success or significance? It's 100 pages. It's really just that one dynamic that is a part of my entire coaching process that I do with executives or leaders or really anybody to help them get from where they are to where they want to be. And it's filled with my own stories. That's what makes it so vulnerable. Like, I wrote the book because I felt, man, I need to get this out there. I'm shifting my life. I'm 60 years old. So I'm like, how do I want to really have influence and impact the last 15, 20 years and really be focused? Yeah. And everyone said, well, write it down, write a book and use that kind of as your lead. And, you do lead gen, right? So use that as your lead to then share the story and the message and the coaching and to help people through. And so the book, Born Limitless, is that piece of my story that I wrote. It's that element of my business practice and my coaching and my leadership development. And out of that, I created this journey of talking about limitless leadership and what does it look like to be a limitless leader in the workplace today. Yeah. And I'm working on redefining leadership, not first as something you do, a position, a title, or a paycheck, but more as influence and impact that your life has on the people in the world around you. And so I start with that definition. A limitless leader is there's 6 principles I talk about. It's not in the book, but that's part of the process. But our challenge is we've got to get through some belief systems that says this is what leadership is. It's about a position and a title and authority and followers. And yes, those all have parts of definitions of leadership, but without character, without vision, without values, without dealing with the human side, yourself first, you got to lead yourself before you can lead others. You're going to end up having brokenness around you in areas and limited, success in areas. And so that's what the book is. That's how I got there. The way so it's funny. I didn't have a clue. I just said, I'm going to write it, got a publisher. And then I had somebody ask me, hey, do you think it's a good book? I said, well, I think the content's good. The stories are good. I don't know if it's a good book. Well, do you want people to read it? Yeah, that's why I'm writing it. I'd love for people to read it. So he says, well, how are they going to get it? I said, well, it's going to be published. It'll be on Barnes and Noble and Amazon. Great. How will people know it's there? I'll tell them. Exactly. And then they ask me, and you know this because you're in the digital market, you're in this world, right? And then they ask me, so I said, well, I'll tell them. And said, well, how many people do you know? I said, man, I know 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 people that I could probably communicate with. They said, that's great. Is that all that you wanted to reach? And I did this thing. I said, well, if I can change one life, it would be worth it. And then they said, is that really what you believe?
I think a limitless belief.
And I said, okay, no. It'd be cool to change one life, but I'm really after hundreds of thousands of lives.
Exactly. Yes.
And so anyways, they took me on this journey and I was like, well, doggone it, I don't know how to do, I don't know. So anyways, we got on a marketing strategy. I'm behind the curve from when it launches. The book comes out May 7th. We're in pre-sales. I'm working with a great organization that's helping me strategize. I've had launch parties, and I'm traveling to speak, and just trying to sell the book beforehand, because what they tell me, I guess you may know this, we're trying for a bestseller list. Okay, so I'm just, I have some pride and ego, and I'd love to say I'm a bestseller. It's not why I did it initially, but the results of that. And so I'm just not going to lie. That would be really cool. Yeah. Going for USA Today at the base and then going from there.
Absolutely.
But they said it's done by the number of units that you sell in a set period of time. In a 5-day window, you have to sell so many units. So I said the goal is pre-sales. Yeah. So I'm in this pre-sale mode right now, learning a lot and going, okay, this is hard. So what am I doing? I'm on your podcast because you reach millions, Kevin. You are changing the world. And if I can get in front of you, I can get in front of millions. So,
that's it. But I love it. I love it. I love the journey. You're learning from the marketing side, the go-to-market strategy. And I love the whole pre-sale opportunity. It's an opportunity, 3,000 or 4,000 people, but that isn't the audience that you want. And so, you're doing thought leadership, you're getting things syndicated. There's a lot more awareness. And I'm sure pre-sales will be an indicator of, these opportunities from you, having these speaking opportunities, being guests on podcasts and things of this nature. And I can't wait to follow up with you, after May 7th and learn how this goes and celebrate your USA Today victory.
There you go. Come on. I'm crushing my limiting beliefs, and I'm just believing and in the process. And this is the thought leadership, right? Where I would say to all your listeners, and we have to keep speaking life over ourselves. Everything we do, everything our lives are about is an opportunity to learn and grow. Everything. Yeah. Everything. And I have to choose that. I have to say that. I have to because some of it doesn't feel so good. And I don't want to learn from that. And I don't want to grow from that. I don't even want to experience it. Right. But when I can reframe it and go, no, I'm going to learn and grow till I can't learn and grow anymore. The byproduct of success and money and influence and these things, they're all byproducts of the posture that we take as leaders, as individuals, as humans who say, no, I'm here to learn and grow and give and serve and offer what I am to the world. Yes. And we'll see what happens after that. Right.
Well, I'm gonna piggyback off that. So you're talking about growing and things of that nature. Rick, have you ever had any mentors in your life? And if so, how did they help you grow?
And I have. And I talk a lot about this because I think it's important that we are intentional to pursue those. There are those mentors that I've never met, people like James Allen, who wrote As a Man Thinketh. Andrew Murray wrote a book called Humility. So these guys, they're no longer living, but they've written stuff that I digest every year and put into my spirit, right? And so they've mentored me that way. And then I chose to seek out people who are doing things I wanted to do or were in areas that I desired to be in. And I went and pursued them. One of them was a guy named Dale Galloway. He was a doctoral professor that taught this Beeson program on advanced leadership. And so he would go around and take the small cohort that would get in to people like Tony Robbins and John Maxwell and just Bill Hybels and these people, right? And I didn't get in the program. I was there for something else, but I knew what he was doing. I went to him and said, can I sell your books when you travel? I'll just travel. I don't want anything, but can I come work your book table, carry your bags? Can I come sit and be with you? And he said, yes. So I wasn't in the program, but I was involved in everything they did, got to meet everyone they met, got to soak in everything he was doing. Just because I risked and said, can I serve you when you go these places and I don't want anything from you? Yeah. So my advice to people and what I would say and what I do is I look for people, and they don't have to be in my industry. I look for people of character, success, challenge. I know went through hard things, and I go buy their lunch. I mean, it sounds cliche and people say, well, I did that, but it's real. No, it's real. So that would be, I could give you names of people. I have a guy who discipled me and kind of mentored and coached me for 25 years. He passed 2 years ago, and our relationship changed over the years. We became more peers as he got older and I got older, but we just stuck together. And he said this to me, and I would tell people, if you're looking for someone to mentor you or speak into your life, he said, I will never tell you what to do. I will give you my thoughts. I will tell you if I agree or disagree or if I'm neutral, and you can make any decision you want. And no matter what decision you make, it won't change our relationship.
Yeah, that's great. That's
And
great.
I was like, wow, is that real? If that's true, I really want to be a part of that relationship. And he honored that. He would press me and say, I'm not sure if I agree with that based on things you said, and I would go do it and it would fail miserably. He was like, okay, so what do we learn? What are we doing? And I never felt judged. I never felt criticized. I never felt like he was trying to move me into something he wanted. And I've tried to live that same way.
What a great mentor. I think you shared, so many of the guests in the Growth Fire podcast talk about mentorships and how that helped them with their limitless thoughts. Like a mentor helped influence them. And my number one mentor, I've quoted this a few times before, but it's worth sharing again. He said, you are who you hang with, choose accordingly. And your story about this professor and wanting to be able to go help sell his books, you wanted to hang with that person. Yes. And you talked about they had character. I call it charisma, but they're successful. They have charisma, the way they carry themselves, articulate, gather respect in a crowd, all these types of things. It's something that
good, Kevin.
You often find in a mentor, and sometimes these people don't know that you're seeking them to be the mentor. Sometimes it becomes very obvious, but being in that company helps you maybe make some of these behavioral changes because you learn of other ways of how they how they educate themselves, how they conduct themselves, how they deliver content, things of that nature. And you learn from that stuff. And so, mentors often help you with the limitless stuff too, because what you learn from their experiences can help you change some of the things of your behaviors and help you grow as well.
Kevin, one question I ask them just for people, and this may sound kind of cliche, but it's not. I ask people, even if I only get a lunch with them, what was your greatest failure?
Yeah, it's a great question.
We're always looking, hey, I want to hear about your success. Tell me your story. How did you get here? Man, I got really intrigued with tell me where the greatest mess up was.
Yeah.
What was your greatest obstacle?
Yep.
Man, because that becomes so real to me because we idolize people like, man, look at their success and don't realize the cost it took them to get there.
Yeah, no, I think we've all probably seen some social media clips from time to time where people are being asked, what do you do for a living and stuff like this. But I've seen a few of those where these young people are interviewing what they appear to be successful people because they're coming out of an expensive restaurant or they're a nice car. And they ask me, what do you do for a living? And then, I hear them say, what was your biggest obstacle or what was your biggest failure, stuff like this. And you watch people very vulnerable. And, often people will say that there's no mistakes being made. It's just an opportunity to learn. And, there's so many stories behind all that. But it's the tenacity. I think there's a tenacity to that. And people don't get hung up on the mistake as a failure. They get it as just the next obstacle to overcome to reach that ceiling that you talked about in your discussions today. We've been talking to Rick Torrison. Rick, if anyone wants to connect with you, what's the best way they can reach out to you?
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Well, first, I'd encourage you to buy my book. It's out there. Go to bornlimitlessbook.com. That's the pre-sale place. You can go onto the platforms, but this way it goes through. So bornlimitlessbook.com. And then social media, really, Instagram, it's my name. It's just Rick Torrison. Jump in. If you'll go to my Instagram and you'll DM me, message me with a limiting belief. Hey, here's a limiting belief I had. I will send you a one-page free, nothing to it, just how I process through limiting beliefs, just a high level, kind of take you through some questions to ask. If you'll message me on Instagram, a limiting belief, say you heard me on Kevin's show, on the Growth Fire podcast, and then let me know what that belief is. I'll send you some information. That's a great way to just get connected with what I'm doing and the things that are coming.
That's a great offer. I think I hope a lot of people take up on that because that'd be a great private way to help some people, get through their limiting beliefs. That's really special. Rick, thank you so much for being a guest on the Growth Fire podcast. We appreciate your time. We appreciate your insights. We hope you do well on that book selling, and we wish you continued success on your journey.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Honored to be here.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. We appreciate it as well.
Thanks for listening to the Growth Fire podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.